So I think sometimes the craft of filmmaking, especially for documentary filmmaking, gets lost. And there's a lot that goes into these films before we even think about distribution, and sometimes even before we think about financing, or while we're financing. So I thought we would focus on the films and the directors.
Everything was beautiful and nice. And then one day someone called and said, "You want to go to Baghdad with me?" And that was May 2003. And the war was supposed to be over. And I was like, sure, I'll go. And my filmmaking partner, who's also my wife, was like, you're, what a friggin' idiot. And like, why would you do that? She's German, by the way. And she was like, that's stupid. And there's 400 people with cameras there. And what can you get that no one else can get? And
right, good question.
So we went, and one trip led to another, and I ended up with a unit by the fall of 2003 and started shooting them, and then they started dying, and then there was kind of a film there, and the war started escalating, and then that film was done, and someone saw it, I think at the Angelica in New York, and there's a scene where a prisoner, where we're raiding a house, and an Iraqi journalist and his family their house is being raided, and he's being arrested, and he's on his knees pleading with the soldiers, and someone saw that scene in New York and said, I know that guy. Wow. He was my fixer.
Oh my gosh.
And that led to our next film, The Prisoner, which is about how that man who was, I don't think you see it in the clip, but he, was sitting there filming them, and he's like, I'm a journalist. And it was this incredible synchronicity of things. And then we ended up making another Iraq film. And then after that, another about soldiers coming home.
You made 4 films.
That
came out of Iraq.
I think we've made more than, 4. Yeah.
So it's become a major body of work in your career. It's become, for this moment, the central thrust of your career based on this one film.
But I think it's important to note that it's what begins to consume your life. Mm-hmm. It's like the first one was incredibly successful. The second one was relatively successful. The third one did okay internationally. The fourth one that we just made, which is my favorite of them all, hasn't even sold yet. But it felt like it had to be made. Like you go through this process, and now that's kind of like, we call that part of our life war, 2003 to 2009. Mm-hmm. My daughter was 6 when we started. I think she was 14 when we ended.
It's just, I would meet these characters. I made a film about a boxing gym in the South Bronx. And Annie was a producer on it, but I was directing it, and I sort of fall in love. For me, they're all character-driven films. Even though the subject matters vary a lot, it's about sort of falling in love with a character and bringing that to the screen. And I think that's because I have a background in the theater, and it's really sort of, it's synthesized for me with Joan Rivers, because it's like understanding your characters, like understanding a part in a play. Mm-hmm. And what motivates this character, what are their obstacles, how are they going to overcome it. So that's very much how I personally approach it. And I would just say specifically, one of the films that sort of we directed together, The Trials of Daryl Hunt, came from a phone call from a friend in North Carolina from my theater program. He was doing private investigative work on the case of Daryl Hunt, and he had been tried and convicted twice, and he said, can you come down with the camera crew? So Annie had a car, my friend Will had a camera, and we just went, and I basically filmed this thing for a couple years on and off. And then it lived in the freezer. Some footage lived in the freezer for 10 years, not having been processed.
Unbelievable.
And we couldn't get funding. We really couldn't finish it because the state Supreme Court came back and said he's not innocent. He's going to prison for the rest of his life. And just no one really cared because we were like young filmmakers, and we weren't 60 Minutes trying to expose the system. But 10 years later, in 2003, I got a call from my friend saying, do you remember me? And I was like, yeah. And he said, well, it's the day before Christmas. Daryl's getting out on Christmas Eve. And I was like, oh my God. So I called Annie and I called Will, and I was like,
someone had a car.
We have to go to, someone had a plane ticket. And I was like, I think we have to go to North Carolina. So actually Will couldn't go, but Annie and I went, and then, we finished the film. But while I was finishing that film, I got a phone call from this woman who wanted to do a film about Rwanda, and I remember I was going to soccer practice with one of my kids, and I was on the phone, I was half listening and finishing the film, and I was like, I can't do another project right now. And she said, but my brother's in Darfur, and he's been taking photographs of the genocide. And I was like, really, photographs? Well, I said, well, if he comes back with these photographs, let me know. And sure enough, we were in D.C. with Daryl Hunt and Brian, whose family lives in D.C., and she said, do you want to meet us for coffee? And so we met Brian, talked to him, and we basically did The Devil Came on Horseback as we were finishing Daryl Hunt. So, and then I would just end with how Annie and I, I think one person, it's like a collective passion. I could sell you, you could sell me on something. I think we both just sort of have the same passion about the individual, and we meet him and we go, this could be a good story. And the Joan Rivers thing, I ended up directing she's a co-director, but because it really was a passion project. It was a little bit different because I ended up doing it more, all the shooting, because it was very intimate. It was just me and my 2 crew members. And it was very personal for me because I really wanted to tell her story as a performer. And so, and we sit around our office all the time going like, what about a movie about, and then we get excited about it, and then and it's very much like Mike was saying, like, we don't really tend to get funding, we try, and sometimes we get a little funding here and there, but we just do it really cheaply while we're doing 14 other jobs.
Right.
I mean, when I started out as a filmmaker, and I of course started out down there, like looking up at panels, dreaming someday of being on a panel. But it wasn't because I was making a career of making films about my family. That wasn't like the daydream. It just kind of happened, and in part because Woody Allen didn't call to make a documentary. They didn't ask me to do George Stein, but I get these like calls for weddings and bar mitzvahs and stuff, but I don't.
I don't even get those.
Yeah, well, that's how I keep afloat. My first film was called The Heck with Hollywood, and it was about 3 first-time filmmakers trying to get their films made and mostly sold. I actually started filming back when it was called the IFFM.
I think I still have a sweatshirt.
Yeah.
What's the
It was in Columbus
IFFM?
Circle. It was
The Heck
1987.
with Hollywood.
Yeah.
sweatshirt.
I'll be selling them in the lobby after. Anyway, it was just a straightforward looking out thing, but there was actually one joke directed at me in the film that actually always got the biggest laughs. It was Ben Barinholtz talking about how these filmmakers, it's so sad, they hawk their homes and they sell off their firstborn, to make these films, and they're not going to go anywhere. No one will see them. And he pauses, and this may happen to you. Nobody may want to see your film. and our funder, I remember he sat through the rough cut, and he didn't laugh. I thought it was like a very funny film, and he never laughed, but that line, he laughed uproariously. Anyway. The next film was called Homepage, and actually that's where it kind of began a weirdly organic process, because Homepage was about, it was 1996, and I was like really fascinated with this new thing called the World Wide Web. And what really intrigued me were these people who were keeping what was known then as personal homepages, but we now know them, of course, as blogs. And I started zeroing in on these kids who were doing like really personal stuff about their lives. I thought, like, wow, they're putting up all this stuff about, online where everybody can see it, and do they know the consequences? I mean, like, where is their sense of privacy? And there's this one kid in particular who turns out was a classmate of my stepson's at Swarthmore named Justin Hall, who is now actually on Wikipedia credited as the web's first blogger.
Right.
Right.
And he was just this fascinating character, I thought. He wrote all about his sex life, which was very active. And like, I have a scene of his girlfriend checking the web that day to see what the status of their relationship was.
Nice.
Or to
And
see who he slept with.
Yeah,
Right,
I mean, it
exactly.
was just, but anyway, he convinced me to put up a blog for better, myself. But I didn't want to blog about my sex life. Fascinating though it was. So I kept it about the making of the film. I blogged. I tried to be really, diligent about it. So I tried to blog every other week or so, long ones about the process of making it, and it got very blurry. And as Justin predicted, the New York Times sort of picked up on this, and they did like a full-page article on this whole process of blogging about my film while I'm making it a year before I was finished with the film. But like, how do you turn down a full-page article in the Times?
You don't.
You don't. So, and then another funny thing happened. Justin kept encouraging me to make my blog more personal. it just happens, and I got, as he predicted, more and more positive feedback. The more personal the blog became, the better the feedback, and it kind of had this weird impact on the film. It not only looked outward at these kids on the web, but I started to show how my entire family was getting onto computers. I tried to make them, you're always trying to contextualize your films against some sort of social background or generational background. So that was the background, was my family and my parents struggling to get on and type on my daughter, who was just completely fascinated, and this was the future, these kids getting on computers.
And that
And that's where
inspired
the D word
personal
started.
journey.
Well, can you just tell us, what do you like so much about Woodstock? What draws you here so often?
I love the community of people. I know so many. I respect their work, whether it's filmmaking, it's writing, artists, and I would love to get a home here and be here.
It's a great area. And what's the state of independent film, you think?
I think the state of independent film is better than it's ever been because people are always craving what's real and craving the truth. And people want to because they feel they've been bullshitted long enough.
It's real.
And also, cameras are smaller and more people can tell stories, but the most important thing, of course, are the characters and really being able to take an audience on a journey.
Great. And the slogan for the week has been fiercely independent. What does that mean to you? Do you consider yourself?
I consider myself fiercely independent. It means a sense of freedom. It means that I can do the work I want to do and I can be around the people that I want to be with and show them my work and be alive. And if you weren't independent, you'd have to always ask somebody else if this is okay or this is okay. And you just got to feel it in your heart and with your instincts.
Yeah. And winning Academy Awards, was that an honor to you?
Oh, winning Academy Awards blew me away.
Yeah.
I remember the first Academy Award, which was for a film called Harlan County. They put all the documentarians together, and when our subject, when our category came up, we linked arms and held each other. And when they said Harlan County, USA, I felt these hands pushing me from behind
Your heart
as I
drops.
walked up, and my heart was beating somewhere, I don't know where, but it was amazing.
Great. Well, thank you so much. It was very
You're
nice
so
talking
welcome.
to you. Good luck
Okay.
with everything.
Thanks, and
Thank
with
you
you
so
too.
much.
Thanks.